Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Hello everyone, welcome to the course and Introduction to Disability Studies. We are slowly and gradually going and opening new vistas that concern disability studies. So, you see, like how are we moving in this course, like what are we trying to do with this course? So, initially if you have seen, I introduced disability studies, then I talked about terms associated with disability studies, right, and then slowly I talked about what is norms, what is stereotypes, what is stigma, and most importantly what I was talking in the last lecture about technology, right. So, in these lectures obviously we have been talking and covering up many different issues. One important point that I was making in the last lecture was that when we are looking any particular policies or law or any facilities given to us or assigned to us, so we are not supposed to be carried with the kind of new ideas it has, but also as a disability studies scholar, our job is to see the nuances. What are the other cons, not only the pros, but what are the other cons of it? That is one point I made. Second point I made is that every disabled people's experiences are unique in its own way. Because most of the time when we say people with disabilities, so we are talking about, right, when we are talking about people with disabilities, we are talking about their shared experiences, shared discrimination, shared stigma, but they all have a different way to talk and narrate the stories which are unique in its own way. So, therefore, when we are doing research, we are not supposed to think that the experience of hearing impaired and the experience of visually impaired, or let us say the people who are paraplegic, right, they all are same. No, they all are not the same. We cannot put them in one category. It is impossible, because if we do so, we are ignoring the complexities of their experiences, and that is what we tend to do, because when we do, we generally do it because it is so easy for us, right. Let us say conform to one particular idea or one particular rule or one particular law or one particular custom, right. But when we see there are a lot of differences, it becomes very, what Sildrick says, it becomes a very dangerous discourse to incorporate. But a researcher or the people should be open for it. They should think about new ways to incorporating these different experiences, and that is why I have been constantly pitching that the normative structure, which are so rigid, which are so tight, which are so cramped, it has to be bit flexible, it has to be bit stretched, it has to be not to be tightened, but a little bit loosened, so that maximum marginal identity who are subjugated, who are discriminated, they can also be part of it. All right. Another interesting point when I am talking about people with disabilities, so this lecture is not only meant for physically handicapped people, but also for mentally disabled, right, because these are a disability which are invisible, not visible. So, when they are invisible, so what happens, then we tend to think that they are very much like other, like very much like they are conforming to the norm. But the problem is that they are experiencing different kind of challenges, and they have no idea how to cope with the new norms which are asking for them to comply with it. So, therefore, we are supposed to be also considerate, we are also supposed to be more sympathetic or empathetic towards these mentally disabled people as well, because their contribution, their ideas, their experiences, their incorporation will generally promote the idea of inclusion, right. Because in true sense, inclusion only means when despite the differences, people are together sharing experiences, talking, working, accessing, right. So, this is what we have been arguing in some of our lectures, but every lecture what I am talking about has its a unique idea to cover it, and they are very significant and very important for all of us to touch upon it. Okay. So, when we indulge in this disability discourses, as I always say, disability studies is not only for people with disabilities, but also for people who are marginal, which means to say any identity which are marginal identity, they can relate with the idea proposed by disability studies, right. Now, but one thing when I say this, there is a second proposition come. Does that mean every marginal identity should be considered as one identity? No, that is where I beg to differ. That is what I am saying, that no, we cannot say this, because every identity has its own take, every identity has its own point to make, every identity has its own consideration, and therefore, they all are different, and which is why I have dedicated this lecture on three different ideas. The one is disease, second is deformity, and the third one is disability. So, basically you may say 3D. Now, if you see that in the second lecture I touched upon these ideas, but I did not expand it, because obviously I knew that I am going to talk about these discourses about disease, disability and deformity in our coming lectures. Now, as you all know, what is our pedagogy and methodology to study and read? We should ask the question that why are you going to talk about disease, disability and deformity, right? Because what happens when we are talking about disabilities, obviously what happens when there are other marginal identity, let us say for example, women's identity, other racial identities. So, people have made very categorically clear that they have a different concern, they have a different thinking, they have a different issue to raise, and their way of navigating with this normative structures are different. However, when it comes to disease, disability and deformity, the problem happens, we think that they are synonymous to each other. They can be used interchangeably, which means to say either we say that you are a disabled body or either we say you are a diseased body, does not make a much difference, right. And that is why what happens, that everyone thinks that a deformed body is equal to a disabled body, or let me put the second equilibrium, a diseased body is equal to a disabled body. But this equation is very problematic. I mean, I am extremely uncomfortable when people equate disability with disease or disease with deformity or deformity with disability, right. So, they all disability, disease and deformity, they all are very different to each other, and we are not supposed to think that they all are the same. Okay. The question is why? Why do we need to say like this? Why do we need to talk about that they all are different? Because that is a question one will think about it, right. Because so far in this popular imagination it has been projected that they all are the same. But if we are doing research or we are engaging with disability studies, we need to make this difference pretty clear, because as I was arguing in the previous classes and today I am also arguing, is that their experiences are different. Let me give you an example. Suppose there is a diseased body, right. So, it is a medically can be cured. You are suffering from fever because of certain virus, or then you have suffering from something else because of certain bacteria or influenza or certain other syndromes that you are experiencing, and that can be medically cured, which means to say that what you are today may not be tomorrow. Obviously, that is case goes with the disability as well, but disability resists to be part of medical institutions, because disability has a more problem with the given structure outside environment. It has a problem with the kind of a social setup it is created, and if you change, there is a maximum possibility is that most of the problem can be addressed. But yes, it does not mean that all the problems will be addressed. Let us say for example, steering is not a environmental structure problem. Obviously, you can say that people are uncomfortable and that is why they look at it, but somewhere or other way it cannot be said that entirely that steering is related or dependent upon environmental structural problems, right. And then we have a deformity. Deformity is kind of a disfigurement, or let us say again anything that deviates with the norm, which means to say a norm expect you to look good, no scars on your body, or kind of expectations, assumptions it has about your body, right, a normative body, how a body should look like, right. Let me give an experiment, right. That is what I always do. I give you a task and then you do this task and then you understand the point pretty clear. Suppose if I ask you to just roughly sketch a kind of a body which you think is good on your rough page. Obviously, you will not provide a sketch of a body which is deformed, which means to say there is no nose, or let us say for example, the lips are twisted, or any kind of a mark which are so called aesthetically not acceptable in the society, right. So, this is very problematic idea which I am suggesting to you, but if you do so, you will see you are going to create a body which looks very handsome or fair in so called in the normal sense. The question is that why is it so that we do not think a disfigured body also as a normal body? Because normalcy, the discourse of normalcy does not allow this to happen. It does not let this happen. It does not ask us to do the same, right. So, that is why we see that they all are very different, but deformity does not seriously concern with disability studies in a sense that the experience are the same. Obviously, deformity is very much part and parcel of the object of study for people with disabilities or disability studies, but when it comes to disability, they all are very different. Let us think in that way, and let us move to the slide number 1. Here we have slide number 1, right. Here you see what I am trying to do. In the first slide, I am going to first make you understand or resurf your memories properly or extensively. I am going to talk today about disease, disability and deformity. What do they mean? How do we understand when someone says that it is a diseased body, or someone says that it is a disabled body, or someone says that it is a deformed body, right. What kind of a body can be said that is abnormal body, right. That is where we are leading towards, because if these kind of a body are not aligning with the very discourse of abnormal or abnormalcy, then absolutely there is no problem with it, because the abnormal is something which is a large corpus, and where different kind of a body which do not align with normal body or which deviate with normal body, they fall under the category called abnormal body. So, let us say for example, in today's normal structure or normative discourse, if someone says that diseased body is abnormal body, I would say yes. What I mean to say, they deviate from the norm, that is why people accept it as a abnormal body. Disabled body is abnormal body, yes, because it deviates from the norm and people do not accept it, therefore, it is called abnormal body. Deformed body is an abnormal body, yes, because also deviate from the norm and people do not accept it in the society because of the deviation from the norm, and it is called abnormal body. But they all can be called abnormal body, but diseased body cannot be called disabled body cannot be called deformed body. So, this is the kind of equation I want to make, so that you can understand the major crux of this slide's argument which I am making for us. All right. Let us look at the first point that I am making. What is the first point? The first point is, it refers to an abnormal condition affecting the body or its organs, and it is often characterized by specific symptoms and signs. So, hold on for a second here, look at the slide closely, see that what I am saying is abnormal condition affecting the body or its organs, and it is often characterized by specific symptoms and signs, right. So, what is this first point I am arguing for? The first point is that a diseased body has certain symptoms. Let us say you are coughing, right, you are sneezing, your body has got a temperature, right, you are vomiting, right. So, these are called symptoms or sign which says that you are not feeling well or you are not comfortable with your body, there is something so called wrong with it. Obviously, these are the natural phenomena, but in today's society as a medically defined, they are considered to be as not good with you. You are not feeling comfortable, so which means to say that it is not normal. Due to this kind of signs which is directly affecting your body and organs, it is creating abnormal conditions. What is abnormal conditions? Hold on for a second here. Abnormal conditions which is not normal conditions, which means in a particular society, we do not expect you to sneeze, we do not expect you to vomit, right. Let us say for example, I am sure that you must have been in a civilized society, so called civilized society. So, what happens when you sneeze, you basically say excuse me, because it is a kind of act that you performed and you should be excused for it, which means to say that this is not expected from you. And initially, and there is a transition which I want to make. So, initially people used to say I am sorry, right, but sorry is something which you do not want to commit again. But the point is that sneezing, that you cannot control on it, it is going to happen maybe after 10 minutes or maybe tomorrow or again, and that is why you say excuse me, which means that you do not have a control on it. So, sorry basically suggests that you do not want to do this often, and excuse me basically means I do not have a control, but I am feeling bad because I made you guys uncomfortable. So, here you see that there is symptoms and signs which are not acceptable, certain signs of your body, certain symptoms of your body is not acceptable in a society, and that is a particular reason that it is called abnormal condition, because normal condition means you do not sneeze, you do not cough, you do not vomit. So, you see how medically it has been, certain conditions has been institutionalized, right. However, you know that everybody is going to cough or going to sneeze or going to have a high temperature because of obviously certain natural reason, but it has been made so cultural that it is forced upon you that you are not supposed to be prone to these kind of diseases, or you are not supposed to show these kind of symptoms and signs in a public spheres. All right. So, here you see this is what it is called diseased, right, which means there are certain symptoms or signs which are produced by your body and which affects your organs, and people call it as abnormal conditions. All right. Let us now go to the second point that I am making under the disease. What is that? it can be caused by various factors, right. So, which means to say that you are getting a disease, for that there are certain factors responsible, right. Obviously, people identify that why is it so, and what are those factors, as the slide says. Read the slide please. Pathogens. Various factors include pathogens. Mind this, disease has a connection with pathogens. I will make a second equation after a second, such as bacteria, virus or parasites, genetic mutations, environmental factors or lifestyle choices. Environmental factors simply means that suppose suddenly cold or suddenly hot, or you had a bath with a cold water, you are not accustomed to that, right. So, environmental factors, and then also lifestyle choices, which means to say that nowadays you are eating lot of junk food, right, or you are not taking good water. So, kind of a lifestyle choices that you have made, due to that these pathogens are activated, they are active in your body, and that is leading you to fall for a particular disease, whatever may be, right. Whatever pathogens you got, due to that you are falling for certain disease, right. So, here remember two things I am making a point. The one, there is a factor, what are the factors responsible for disease, and as I will proceed further, you will notice that in deformity and in disability, these factors are going to be the different. So, tell me one thing, when the factors are different which is leading to to make a body something different, how can they all call same, right. So, one idea which I am putting emphasis on, that for diseased, for disability, for deformity, there are different factors are responsible. So, for disease there is a pathogens, bacteria, virus and parasites. There are environmental factors as well, but these environmental factors are not the same as it is going to be responsible for leading to disability or disease, right. We will talk about it, deformity as well. Let us look at now third important point, that is made about diseased. The third point is giving you an example. I am giving you an example that includes infectious disease like influenza, right, chronic conditions like diabetes, autoimmune disorder like rheumatoid arthritis, right. So, these are infectious disease, right, which includes these kind of. So, this is what you see, that the entire idea of disease. Now, let us move to second important concern that we have, what is called deformity. What constitutes the very discourse of deformity? How deformity comes into the picture? What kind of a deviation is called deformity? It is a more aesthetic or non-aesthetic, because as I understand that deformity has a huge connection with aesthetic, rather than disease has not much connection with aesthetic as much deformity has. Second reason I am going to also look upon, what are the factors that are responsible for deformity. All right. So, now let us look at the slide please and see what deformity is. Deformity involves a structural abnormality in the body, right, a structural abnormality, often resulting in irregular shape of a form. So, what do you mean by irregular shape of a form, right? Let us say for example, I just roughly sketched a kind of a body on your screen, and here you see that you expect that this shape should not exceed a certain boundaries, right. Let us say for example, certain inches, that is how medically defined, and then these two hands, these two legs, they should be of the same size or the same length, and this is called body mass, right. You heard that your weight, your height, and also, right, also what your age is, they all medically designed and defined that that should be a kind of proportion to certain things, right. So, that is why when you go, you are feeling well, you are nice, you are feeling great, you have absolutely no problem. But suddenly what happens when you go and put like weigh your weight like on a machine, and then it says something else, and then you meet a doctor, it gives you and you say, hey, no, it is a problem, right. Your weight is less or your weight is too much, you should reduce your weight or take a medicine. Suddenly you see what is happening. Now you are pretty much comfortable outside the medical discourse, since you are feeling nice, great, doing your job every day. But suddenly you entered into the health center where you weigh your body, and you found that there is a problem with your body, because it does not align with what is medically defined, that up to this age, up this much height of the person should have this much weight. So, the moment like this, just a second, let me put it on your screen, height, weight and then age, right. If there is certain things here does not align, and then what happens, you see that you are part of medical subject. Now, you are going to be treated as if you are not feeling well, right. So, this is what point I am making before I enter into what deformity is. Let us look at it again, the slides. It involves a structural abnormality in the body, often resulting in an irregular shape or form, which I have made this clear. It can be congenital, which means present at birth, or acquired later in life due to factors such as injury or disease or developmental abnormalities, right. So, here you see that when I am talking about deformity, the factors are not pathogens, the factors are not inside the body, maybe congenital, there are certain regions, but deformity can happen if you are suffering from certain disease. So, there are differences, which means disease may lead to deformity. But again my point is not this, the point what I am making is that how deformity can be so prone to scrutiny in a normal society. When you know that everybody can be deformed or deviate from the norm today or tomorrow, right. So, why it has become a subject of a taboo? Why a body, a deformed body is stigmatized? Why a deformed body is discriminated? Why a deformed body is not accepted in our society, which is called so good? So, these are the important concerns that I am raising. Let us move to the next slide now. So, these examples includes skeletal deformities like scoliosis, facial deformities like cleft lip, right. So, this is something like becomes a cleft lip, and then we have what I was talking about, limb deformities, which means the club foot. So, you see that this kind of a deformity where you have a cleft lip or where you have a club foot, these are not a disease. Let us say for example, you have a cleft lip, right. If there is a problem in your lip which is there, you can eat food properly, you can breathe properly. There is absolutely, like obviously if you go to a medical institution, they would say that no, there is something wrong with it, but trust me, there is nothing wrong if you have a cleft lip, is absolutely fine. But today's society, which I am going to talk in the next lecture, industrialization, capitalism and disability studies. So, I will talk more about these kind of discourses there, but what I am trying to make a sense here is that this is not a disease. You are not supposed to go to a doctor. Obviously, people are going to a surgeon and like removing this and making it so called look like a normal, aesthetically appealing, but trust me, there is absolutely no issue with it. You are not disabled, you are not a diseased body, right. You are perfectly fine, so called. But the point and concern we have here when we are entering into this discourse or domain is that why don't we think about it other way around, right. Why not we are thinking that they all are part of our normal society. But the problem is that the moment you have a cleft lip or let us say club foot, we are going to treat you as if you are disabled, as if you are not allowed in a society. You should go and like get check up, get diagnosed some problem or take some medicines, right. So, this is where we have a concern. Where does it come from? Why is it so? All right. Let us go to the next slide, please. The concept of deformity is highly subjective, right. That is a concern. Think about it. The concept of deformity is highly subjective and context dependent. That is a very important point I am making, extremely significant. Let us say for example, the normal height of a person in a particular tribal area is 4 feet, but the moment he moves to different society, he is going to called as that body is abnormal, he is a dwarf, he is a disabled. In certain areas, in certain communities, there are people who are absolutely different color of, right, they have different color. And the moment they move to a society where the people have a different color or different skin color of their body, what would happen? Right? The person who is moving with a different skin color in a community where they have a different skin color, they will say it is a deformed body, or there is a possibility that they will also suggest that you should go and meet a doctor, or there is something wrong, you are so scary. But imagine it happens vice versa. In a community, a person of that community moved to his community or her community, the same experience, the same feeling, it will be experienced. That is why there is a very good novel. I would suggest you that if you get time, I am sure that you have read it, but in case if you missed it, please read. I am writing down on the screen. It is called Gulliver Travels. It is by Jonathan Swift. It is a wonderful novel, and you will the moment you read this novel, you can easily relate what I am talking about. All right, and it's highly subjective, right, because you see that everyone has a sense of a beauty very different. Everyone thinks about the idea of a beauty very differently. Everyone has a different consideration. Everyone thinks about the idea of a body very different, like someone likes beard body, someone like who has a beard, someone doesn't like, right. So, it's a more subjective as well, and that is why we need to make this point that the concept of deformity is highly context specific and is a very highly subjective, and therefore, it should not be presented as if there is something wrong with the body. In fact, it is a more problematic because of the perception that we have. It is the problem lies not in the body, but the problem lies in the perception, in our assumptions, the way we look at it, the way we notice, and that is where the problem lies. And that is what I am making a point is that it's that there is a departure. When disability studies enter into this discourse, it makes a departure that the problem is not with the body, the problem is very much available in the society. The society that claims, that says or states or prescribe the norm that X, Y, Z who belongs to this kind of category are disabled or deformed. All right. So, this is why keep this point in the mind that deformity is more about being context specific and subjective. All right. Let us move to the next point then. It hinges on two presumptions. First, the existence of a standard normal body from which deviation are judged, and second, the establishment of societal consensus regarding attribute that constitutes deformity, right. So, this point I have already made this clear to you that any body which deviates from the norm, however its body is comfortable, good, so called healthy, nice, but if it is deviating from the norm, it is going to be called deformed body. And as I said again, that everything that deviates from the norm is like disability has open arm and say, okay, come to me. Everyone says the same thing. Anything that deviates from the norm, that it's disabled, it's disabled, it's disabled, right? So the point that I am constantly making with this argument is this, that there is a certain deviation of the normal, and there where the problem starts with. Let us move to the next point now. This understanding underscores the influence of social norms and power dynamics in shaping perceptions of bodily appearance. The perception of deformity varies across culture and historical periods, reflecting diverse beliefs and value system. In ancient times, the deformity was often associated with ominous signs, demonic influence or supernatural forces. Some culture resorted to extreme measures such as ritualistic killing of deformed infants based on superstitions and fears. Conversely, certain cultures reward individuals with deformities, viewing them as possessing special powers or connection to the divine. So, deformed individuals were sometimes elevated to positions of authority such as shamans or priests, symbolizing a shift in societal attitudes toward deformity, right. So, this slide is making a very interesting point, right. It is making 2 points. The one, that there are kind of societies, if you look at, I mean, it is going back to the history, because that is why the next lecture is going to be extremely significant. It will relate what I spoke just now, because what happens in certain societies, that deformity is accepted as if divine attributes. It is like God has given that gift, we should accept, because it looks so different, and because of its difference of being unique, right. So, there are societies seen and is still available where deformity is considered to be as a part of divine attributes, like it's a God gift. In fact, when you see that most of the people have a deformed face or certain things on his face, the people think that he is a basically incarnation of Hanumanji, all right. So, you see that in India, gods are, I mean, with all due respect to religious sentiments, I have no intention to defame or create any blasphemy, but you know that in religion every maximum gods are somewhere or other way deformed. Like look at the Ganesha ji, he has a head of elephant. Look at Shankar ji, right, the kind of body he has, he put animals around, snakes, so on and so forth. Look at the Brahma ji, he has 3 or 4 faces, right. So, all the gods, if you see and notice, they all are in some way or other way deformed, right. So, what results in, what happens, that the moment some body is deformed, people think that okay, he is an incarnation of some god, or let us say messenger of the god, or is a divine figure, they start worshipping that kind of body or start paying a kind of reverence or respect to that body. That is one way a body, deformed body is being treated in one kind of society or one particular tribal areas. Second section of the society, there is also seen, there are many societies where they find as a woman, they find as if it is a evil, a body which is deformed is an evil body, right, and this kind of body should not exist, exist in our society. They must be killed or thrown or removed out of our sight, right. And obviously, most of the children, there are cases in Europe, you can read the history. There is a very good book, The History of Disability by Steiker, Henry Jackson Steiker. Do read it, you will find it very helpful what I am talking about, you can relate it over there, that there are many societies in the West where deformed bodies were killed, right. They were massacred, they were thrown, because it was considered that they are evil. Now, you see, most of the time what happens, we see that, oh, that kind of society is bad, but that kind of society is good, because In a one society, they are not allowing deformed bodies to live, but there is the second kind of society where they are allowing deformed body to live as a divine figure. But as a disability studies scholar, we have a problem with the both. It is not that one is acceptable, one is not acceptable, both are not acceptable. Obviously, killing is a very heinous crime and everyone has right to live. Snatching the right to live of anyone, X, Y, Z, deformed, diseased, disabled, normal, abnormal, you say anything. This is extremely heinous thing to do in a very good society where you are killing someone, all right. But the problem is, because in both ways you are not accepting as if they are one of us, that is argument. In both scenario, in both the circumstances, you are not accepting both of them as one of us, and that is a problem. That is a serious concern. How are you going to then promote the discourse of inclusion, where you are giving equal space to everyone, not someone is a divine or someone must be thrown out of the society, but they all are very much part of us. They have very much right to live with us. So, let us stop thinking like this about the deformed body, all right. So, this is the intervention of disability studies to not let this happen, because that is something wrong have been happening with a body marked with differences, and which is why it is a high time that we need to stop it. That is a high time we need to intervene and produce a kind of discourses which can change the assumptions. But as you know, how will it affect the assumptions? It is only possible through representations, right. So, which I have already discussed and covered. So, I will not go into that. Let us move to the next points now. So, this individuals, right, they are like the problem that we have, they are elevated to position of authority. This is wrong, right. This is not acceptable, and also this is not also accepted, that there is a fear or superstitions about people with disabilities, right. Moving to the next slide, what we have here is that in contemporary society, attitudes towards deformity continue to evolve, albeit with lingering stigmas and prejudices. Throughout history, attitudes towards deformity have been diverse and often shaped by cultural, religious and societal beliefs. In Leviticus, for example, participation in religious rituals was prohibited for those deemed as deformed, reflecting a perception of physical imperfection as impurity, right. Like I will come to this point, just hold it for a second. Similarly, in ancient Greek culture, deformity was sometimes associated with moral corruption, right. Look at this point. Deformity means moral corruption. I do not know where does this come from, but that is how people have started thinking about it, and that we can also see Homer's portrayal of therapist in the Iliad. So, this is, I am sure that you all know Iliad is a very famous text and there is a character, right. So, Greek society, but in a Greek society was relatively tolerant towards individual with disabilities, exemplified by revered figure of the god Hephaestus, who was himself deformed. In contrast, the Roman linked deformity to magical power, viewing it as a potential source of supernatural abilities. And then when we move to the medieval period, deformity was often interpreted as a manifestation of God's wrath or punishment for a sin. So, despite this, there were instances where individuals with deformities were respected and revered purely in Christian context. Like say for example, Gregory of Tours and Teresa of Avila were treated as saints with their deformities seen as a marks of divine favor or opportunities for Christian charity and mercy, right. So, one thing, I mean, I have also understood when I read Greek culture, Greek society. In fact, Nietzsche, right? Friedrich Nietzsche has talked a lot about the Greek society. Greek society was quite open, and it was very acceptable to any kind of a body, right. Obviously, there were ways to look at it, but at least to a certain extent I would say it was more tolerable. The Greek society was more inclusive than any kind of society existed. I am not coming to the South Asia. Like South Asia was always been very inclusive, right, but unfortunately now it is not anymore the way it was in ancient times. Obviously, as I come to the next lecture, I will talk about it, but the question that I am raising it here is this, that we need to go back to the history first, and we should look at the kind of society we lived in, or a kind of society where people with deformity or disability, they got a kind of treatment, and how it proceeded. An interesting point, you will see that as the society progressed, the treatment with people with disabilities or with diseased body or deformed body changed very drastically, right. My question is this, the deformed body was the same as it is today, but why is it so? The treatment it received differs from the ancient, medieval, modern or the society in which we are living in. Now, it makes this idea pretty clear that it is because it is not with the body, it is more with the society, it is more with the culture in which you are living, it is more with the norms that you have standardized or regularized. Why is it so? The same kind of deformed body is acceptable in a Greek society. If there is something wrong with the body, even if you are living in a Greek society, you will not be accepted, but it makes this point pretty clear that there is a wrong with the society. Second is, how can you equate somebody with the moral corruption, right? Because moral corruption has nothing to do with the body, but that is the way through which you can exclude the body, right? Because in a society we are tend to judge a person so quickly, like Oliver Twist. What happens? Whenever Oliver Twist, if you have read all the novels, Oliver Twist goes into the city, and there he does not pick pockets, he does not rob anyone, but everyone looks at him, and when he sees, when they find that he is wearing a different kind of a clothes, poor clothes, people think that, oh, he is a poor person, he is a poor boy, and that is, so he is the one who is robbing us. He is the one who must have done this mischievous behavior, but we all know that was not true. So, it is a kind of a satire that how we are more inclined towards judging a person on the basis of their clothes, dresses, faces, and how does someone look like, right. So, this is something, attaching morality with a kind of a body is a way through which you exclude someone, all right. So, it has nothing to do with the like a body, like if you are born with a deformed body, you will do corruption. It is not like naturally given to you, right. It is more about that how you can be excluded, will not be accepted in our society, all right. What is the second point? That in our society is also seen that most of the time it is considered that if you are born with deformity, it is a punishment of a sin that you committed in the past. So, now you are going to live with this guilt or shame that I have committed a particular kind of a crime in our past, and that is why I am born as a deformed. So, in this world or in this life, you are going to come out of that crime, so that in the next birth you are born as a not a deformed body. I mean, this is a very ridiculous and ludicrous at the same time, right. I mean, you see that where you will be born, what kind of society, as we have been talking about, what kind of a culture you are. So, this is extremely unacceptable, and that is why we must make this claim that in our societies, in our films, in our images, in our popular imaginations, in our society, so magazines or newspapers, this kind of representation where a deformed body is shown as a morally corruptible is something wrong. In fact, what happens, if a deformed body, any person who is deformed, if they have done the crime, so people think that it is because he is deformed, that is why he has committed a crime. This kind of also conjecture we must raise our voice against, because what it does, it is going to tarnish the very discourse of deformity and the other people who so called considered deformed in a society, right. So, what would happen? They will be more liable to be, like they will be more prone to violence, and this is not, we are going to accept it anymore, right. So, let us move to the next slide please. So, with the rise of biomedicine and eugenics, deformity was increasingly being viewed through a medical lens as a marker of disease or genetic abnormality. I have already talked about eugenics, so I am not going to touch it again, and this shift in perspective has led to pathologization of deformity and the medicalization of its treatment, emphasizing intervention aimed at fixing or eradicating physical differences, right. So, now you see that, which anyway I am going to talk about, that how slowly and gradually the deformed body has become part of medical institutions, and people are thinking that there is something wrong with the body and it must be cured, all right. Now, comes the disability. I have discussed with you that what disability is, right. As you see that, like I have been talking about disability, so I will not explain this to you because you already know, but it refers to kind of limitations in performing activities due to impairment in physical, cognitive, sensory or mental functions, right. And the very result it has, it is generally the factor which are responsible for disability, obviously some kind of disease through which it occurs disability or results in disability, but at the same time because of the kind of inaccessible infrastructure that make you feel disabled. Let us know. So, I am not going to much in discussion of disability. Now, let me put it more disease versus disability. Look at the slide please. Disability as a social construct, right, not as a physical attribute. It is not what a person possesses, but what they encounter when interacting with others or navigating inaccessible physical spaces. Disease is typically viewed as a bodily condition or malfunction, right. Look at this, bodily function or malfunction. Maintaining a strict division can be overlooked complexities. For example, someone with asymptomatic AIDS face discrimination at work. It is clearly an issue of disability discrimination, even though the disease is not symptomatic. So, placing emphasis on the location of the issue, where in the body or in the society perpetuate the view of disability and disease as isolated entities rather than interconnected aspects of human experience. So, maintaining a clear distinction between disability and illness is crucial to preserve the political effectiveness of disability advocacy. Without this distinction, the definition of disability risk become diluted, which could undermine effort to combat discrimination and ensure legal protection for people with disability. So, the point what I am making, my dear friends, is that disease and disabilities are different, but not every time we should say that we are not going to talk about disease when we are talking about disability, because we have seen that they share certain experiences, they share certain relations, they have a problem with the society and there they align. But the very notion that we must make it a difference so that they have their own complex experiences, and if we do not talk about it, it will miss the very discourse of disability. And also what I say, look at the slide please, definition, it will risk become diluted. So, discourse of disability should not be diluted, because what if it takes a shift, right, it takes a shift from disability to disease and the entire discourse move around disease, not towards a disability. What would happen to the complexities and experiences of people with disabilities? All right, so this is the point I wanted to make. Let us move to the next slide. If everyone is considered disabled in some capacity, discrimination against people with disabilities become indistinguishable, making it challenging to enact meaningful changes such as ensuring accessibility in public spaces. So, I have talked more about it, so I will quickly overglance it. So, look at this point. Whenever we become overly optimistic about the ease of altering social construct and too confident in our ability to swiftly change societal norms, it is essential to recognize the inherent limitations, right. So, also I am making a point that it is not that we should constantly shift every discourse to environment, but we should also think that body is also there. It has its own complexities. So, I am never saying, I never make this argument that everything is wrong with the environment, everything is good about body, but you should also pay attention to complexities of the body itself, all right. So, moving to the next slides, it is important to acknowledge that much of our culture is deeply entrenched in the medical model, which I will explain in the next lecture, which heavily influences how we perceive and understand various aspects of human experience, including health and disability. So, while construction can be reshaped to some extent, right, look at this. This is the important significant point. We must remain cognizant of the enduring influence of biological realities and pervasive impact of medical paradigm on our societal framework, right. So, with this point I will end the lecture here, that when we are talking about that everything is social construct, obviously there is a reality to it, but it's our attention should not only be it should not completely shifted to questioning the environmental structure, but as a research scholar, as a students, we must also take biological realities into the account to do the justice with the discourse of disability, right. So, disability studies never ever say that we are going to keep aside biological reality, that is not true. They both have its own way to talk about disability. So, we should take both environmental problems as well as biological realities into the account, all right. So, with this lecture I would end it here. Thank you so much for your patience and listening to me. The next lecture I am going to talk about industrialization and disability, which is extremely significant and relates from here. But stay safe, stay healthy. Thank you so much. See you next time. Bye bye.